Hi, I'm Cody from Colorado Conservative Media. Today we have one of the candidates in the 8th District running for State Board of Education. His name is Cody LeBlanc. Mr. LeBlanc currently serves as treasurer to the Fort Lupton Food and Clothing and Bank, he was a founding board member of the Boys and Girls Club of Weld County, the Fort Lupton Clubhouse, a member of the Fort Lupton Booster Club, a 17-year member to the Parent-Teacher Student Association in Fort Lupton Schools, where he currently serves as president to the Fort Lupton Schools High School PTSA, and co-chair of the Weld County Fair Royal Committee. Cody is also a founder and co-executive director of the Freedom Advocates of the Rockies, an organization created to educate and inspire all people on what it means to be an actively engaged American. Well, welcome. We're happy to be speaking with you today.
Well, thanks so much, Cody. It's always interesting to say your own name to whoever's interviewing you.
Right. Initially I had planned to just vote for you because you had my name.
Well, I appreciate you digging in a little bit more to vote for me for the facts than just the name. But
Absolutely.
I appreciate that, too.
Yeah, we're conservatives. We actually do a little bit of research, right?
Yeah, we prefer facts over feelings and looking into records.
Definitely. Well, so let's go ahead and get right straight into it, I guess. If you go ahead and Google Colorado education issues, the first article that pops up, well, let's be honest, the first article you click is the first one that's not an ad, right? It's the first one on top that's not an ad. You click that one. And the first one is a piece from Chalkbeat, Colorado. In that article, it talks about accountability in terms of standardized testing, funding, collective bargaining, preschool, workforce training, and the lockdown recovery. Does this seem completely out of touch with the parents of Colorado and what they are concerned about?
It does to an extent. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned in there from that article is standardized testing. So standardized testing is something that I've been vehemently opposed to since I was a student in schools and started paying attention to politics and the way that our education system was run. But critical race theory, social emotional learning, the conversations around gender dysmorphia and the sexualization of our children is really what's more at the top of parents' minds right now, especially as we're going into an election season when kids are truly what's on the chopping block. Their future is at stake with what we do today. And
with that said, what can we do today to, like, specifically policy-wise? What's happened in the past? I know we spoke earlier and we had discussed some of the stuff you've already done. Let's go ahead and discuss that and touch on that.
Yeah, so I was elected to the Weld RE8 schools, that's Fort Lupton, Dacono, and a tiny portion of Brighton, and an even smaller portion of Broomfield, to their local Board of Education in 2019. I ran for that seat because of House Bill 19-1032, the comprehensive human sexual identity garbage legislation that the state forced on local districts that really, and frankly, is demonic in what it teaches children about sex education. I don't know about you, but when I was in school, we were taught the basics, that you don't have sex, and then there's very little likelihood for children to result in that. Now they're being taught that abortion is a form of birth control, and that's absolutely asinine to even consider that that's where we're at in today's standards. So from there, though, while I've served on the local board, I've made it easier for families to opt out of the criminal sex education curriculum by actually requiring opt-ins instead of opt-outs. Most districts around Colorado require families to opt their students out and don't necessarily notify them in enough time, or the parents aren't paying as much attention as they could be. In our district, we've now made it so that families actually have to sign a paper saying that, yes, my student can participate in this, rather than surrounding districts.
So what that means is that you are actively signing a paper saying that you can expose your child to this sexual ideology stuff, instead of just being it behind your back without you being aware of it.
Exactly. And since I've been on the local board, I have been in the minority the entire time. When I was elected, it was a 1-4. And since then, we've been able to get 2 other conservatives appointed. So now all of our votes aren't necessarily 1 to 4. We had 2 vacancies when I was elected, but now we have 3 to 4 on some of the more controversial issues. So we still lose, but in that, I refuse to compromise. And that's very clear in that sex education policy. While I don't want the sex education curriculum taught at all, I want to make sure that families are understanding exactly what their children are being exposed to and make sure that they're okaying that. So I fought to ensure that that was in that policy that I ended up voting against, and the rest of the board, thank God I was the last person to vote, because the rest of the board was very confused and probably voted it down because they didn't like that, but they compromised and I refused to. And that's one example of what I've done on the local board to fight for our kids. I've also brought resolutions forward to ban critical race theory in our district, have long conversations with families and parents and teachers to try and understand why social emotional learning is so damaging to our kids. While we haven't been successful in getting the ban on critical race theory to pass in our district, we've at least brought awareness and have parents actively engaged now in the education of their kids and coming to school board meetings, which really never would have happened before COVID and the lockdowns and the shutdowns, where parents finally had a view into what their children were being taught.
You described it earlier as a blessing in disguise.
Exactly. I mean, it was truly a blessing. I mentioned earlier there were a lot of other hidden blessings, but truly it can all be summed up in visibility. COVID allowed us so much visibility into all aspects of our lives, and that's no different when it comes to the education of our kids.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most important things. And one of the things we didn't touch on earlier, it would be safety, right? We didn't talk about the safety of children.
Yes.
But I think that's probably on the minds of parents as well right now, in light of some of the stuff that's going on inside this country.
Absolutely it is. And, on the State Board of Education, we don't get a lot of say in how local districts do things.
Unfortunately, and also that has a lot more to do with actual legislators and what you guys are allowed to do, as educators are allowed to do specifically.
And local board members. I mean, we are in a local control state, and in some ways, we have great local control. In other ways, we're lacking in local control. So that's a great example. So while it is federally illegal to carry firearms inside of educational facilities, law enforcement are exempt. Hired resource officers are exempt, and so there's ways to work around it. It's already happened in several Colorado school districts where the board decides to implement a policy that allows teachers to sign up with no additional pay. It's simply the teachers and the staff and the administrators who feel a duty and feel that they can to sign up as a resource officer, an unpaid resource officer with the title and the ability to then carry their firearm in the classroom. While that is a heated topic, I don't know about you, but to me, if I were a gunman or a criminal, where am I going to go? Am I going to go to a place where I know there's no guns, or am I going to go to a place where I know that every person in there is probably packing?
Right. Would on a school board member, as the state level, would you guys have any control, or would that be purely county related?
So we don't have any control over that on the state board. It's truly a local decision. But with that, I did want to touch on just a couple of the things that the state board does, because it's so, Colorado State Board of Education is set up so differently than the rest of the country. So really we have 3 main goals and objectives, and that is setting the standards for students, appointing the education commissioner for the state of Colorado. Most states, the governor appoints that. In Colorado, it's done by the State Board of Education. And accrediting colleges of learning, or colleges of education. So UNC, CSU, CU Boulder, University of Denver, any of those that actually have courses and do teaching colleges, we accredit those to ensure that teachers are learning how to teach and what the standards are so that they can prepare our students for their future.
See, and that's a great educational piece for the people of Colorado, because I think a lot of people don't understand politics. I think they don't understand what's going on in government across the board, especially as government gets more inflated. This year we can touch on that. How many in the last 10 years, for example, how much bigger the Colorado state budget has gotten, and how that's affected politics across the board. And
well, we see it nationwide that budgets are something that, I mean, I don't know about you. I pay attention to my family budget, know what I can spend, what I can afford not to, what I can afford to buy. Unfortunately, our governments don't seem to work that way, and that's at the local level, that's at the state level, that's at the federal level. I mean, we have $30 trillion in debt at a federal level, and that's just absurd. Then you look at the state of Colorado, where we just continue overspending year after year, and our budget just blooms into massive amounts. Thank God Colorado has the Taxpayer Bill of Rights to protect the taxpayers, to protect our families from unauthorized taxation, and we have a balanced budget. That's not always possible for some states. You look at local school districts like ours, Weld RE8 schools, where I still serve on the board. We had a board meeting last night where we had to approve our budget for the 2022-2023 school year. Last night, the budget, in the first time I've been on the board, was the closest to being balanced, and it still had an $868,000 deficit. We're starting out in the negative. We're planning to spend more money than we're bringing in. And how is that right? How are we teaching children to be responsible adults when even their local school district isn't being responsible with their family's money?
Exactly. And so what can you do at the state board level to affect change at that specifically? To, like, I know when I went to high school, one of the biggest complaints when people graduated was they weren't taught how to do a lot of the things that come with being a responsible adult, and the parents didn't teach them, so they get out in the world and then they don't know how to save, they don't know how to budget, they don't know how to be responsible with money. And I think that's why you see such a low home ownership rate among young people as well. Even the young people now, the millennials, have a young car ownership rate. So how can we prevent that trend from continuing?
Yeah, so it's something that's little known about the State Board of Education is that they actually already have standards for that. There are standards in place through the State Board of Education, through the State Department of Education, that are provided to local districts that teach fiscal responsibility, that teach them family life, that teach them how to live their life as a responsible citizen in the United States, whether that's balancing your checkbook. Not that most people carry a checkbook anymore. I think I'm one of the few people under the age of 30 that has a checkbook. But we didn't learn how to balance a checkbook. We didn't learn how to file our taxes. We didn't learn any of that. Those standards are already set through the State Board of Education and are available for local districts to utilize. One thing that the State Board can do is make it mandatory that districts teach this. While I am fully in favor of that, I also believe that we shouldn't have any unfunded mandates pushed on our schools. That is something that the State Board of Education and the Department of Education have done pretty carefree for the last decade or so, where they just push out, you now have to institute the sex education policy, and we're not going to give you any additional funding to change your curriculum. But here you go. You now have to do this. You now have to meet these standards, but there's no funding attached for you to be able to purchase curriculum that meets these standards.
And how much does that affect the districts? Is that pretty? I mean, I imagine that would be pretty harmful to their operations and what they can accomplish.
Oh, absolutely. So, I'll use our local district because that is where I currently serve and I see firsthand. My Democrat opponent has experience on a local board. Unfortunately, her mentality towards education is very different. But I have the unique perspective on that because we have local districts like ours where this year, for example, last night again, I voted against it, but the board passed the approval of new science curriculum for our high school and middle school. That comes at a price tag. Keeping in mind, our middle school is about 600 students and our high school is about 600 students. So for 1,200 students, the cost for curriculum, and this isn't just total, because there's annual subscriptions in there as well, our cost this year is almost $200,000 to meet the new standards that have been set. We're lucky because we have oil and gas money that we do tend to still end up in the positive at the end of the school year. But large amounts like that coming out in districts that are really struggling isn't fair. That's not right to enforce districts and make it so that they have to abide by these standards without at least providing some sort of an offset to their budget to cover those.
Especially considering the entire reason a lot of people voted yes on the pot bill when marijuana was legalized was because a lot of the tax revenue was supposed to be going towards the school boards. And I don't know today if people see that effect, even though marijuana is one of the most booming industries here in Colorado.
And you're right. I mean, we talk about it a lot on our local board. We were promised. Not we, the people of Colorado were promised through that we would have large influxes of funding to local school districts to help our education. Well, most of that funding has actually been siphoned off to educate people about marijuana. It still falls in their education category. So the amount of money that has been collected going toward education, it's about less than a third actually makes it to the actual education system. And that's flat out wrong. There's nothing on the state board that we can do about that because it is state legislature and the governor who ends up determining the state budget. But on the local level, we fight like heck trying to understand why we're not getting any of this funding that was promised to us, especially when marijuana is affecting our students the way it is.
Exactly, and that is it's devastating, especially considering the other drugs that come with it, with fentanyl on the rise being the leading cause of death among adults between the ages of 18 and 45. But regardless, Cody, it was wonderful speaking to you. I think that anybody looking at your policy positions today can easily say that you are likely the most sane candidate on the ballot. Peggy Probst not being too far off, but on the other side of the ticket, it's not exactly there.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we're trying to wrap up, so I won't take too much time, but I don't want to give her too much free press, but you've got Rhonda Solis, the Democrat running. She was on the Greeley District 6 board. During her time on the board, she fought for COVID masks, COVID vaccine mandates for even the students to return to school. And I'm one that believes wholeheartedly in medical freedom, and I believe every family should have the right to determine how they best care for their family. If they wear masks, great. If they don't wear masks, great. That's their decision. If they want to vaccinate their children, great. If they want to not vaccinate their children, also great. It's not our place as the government, which I take a lot of flack for on the local board because I constantly call us government, and they say, we're the local school board. They said, we're still an arm of the government.
You're a governing body, right? It's a governing body.
Exactly. I mean, there's a book out there called Government Ruins Nearly Everything, and that is absolutely true.
Unfortunately, it is. Well, Cody, also, I know we're wrapping up, but with that said, you really are a good man, and I thank you for your time. If you have anything you want to say to the people of Colorado before you go, I'll go ahead and give you this time.
I appreciate it, and again, just wanting to make sure people visit my website, electleblanc.com. It might be a little tricky to spell, so I've made it even easier and added conservativecody.com. There's no question about my conservative values and my conservative principles that I stand on. So visit my website, check out my Facebook page, Cody M. LeBlanc. I'd love to chat with you and see what we can do.
And we'll have links to that all below. So thank you for your time, and God bless you all.